Remember what I said about Cartoon Network having a bright future when it comes to ideals and knowing what they're doing in comparison to Nickelodeon from my We Baby Bells vs. Camp Koa video? Well, that hasn't aged well judging of the state of the situation that Cartoon Network is in, and the fact that this is possibly the final crossover we're ever going to see involving Cartoon Network characters. You know, knowing full well that this episode that was released last year was supposed to be special involving We Baby Bells in Summer Camp Island, I actually got into the idea and thought about reviewing it last year, but due to the depression and being burned out, it just wasn't enough, especially since I wasn't even in the Halloween mood last year. But since that I'm in full gear in the Halloween mood this year, this is the only way for me to talk about this episode involving the last crossover possibly from Cartoon Network. The Bells are teleported in a graveyard that is Halloween related, and they were planning to go trick-or-treating, but unfortunately with this neighborhood being a bad neighborhood, which is in the perspective of Panda, Grizz instantly thinks that it's mainly Halloween related, and considering that this is mostly a crossover episode, I can guarantee you that if this was an actual Halloween episode, it would probably be predictable on Grizz being oblivious, and the fact that it will probably drag out rather than being entertaining. But at least this is a crossover episode. They come across a book that accidentally summons Susie, Bestie, and Alice from Summer Camp Island, and this leads to a rivalry between Grizz and Susie. Usually I would discuss more about the plot, but with this being mainly a crossover between three characters from their own worlds, which I do mean Grizz and the others, and Susie and the others in their own respective groups, this really feels like they really wanted this crossover to be entertaining, but also adorable, judging of the facial expressions from Summer Camp Island, since this is taking place in We Baby Bells. Okay, here's my opinion on the rivalry of Grizz and Susie in this. To tell you the truth, if this ended up happening in We Bear Bells, and I do say bear, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't even work out for a scenario involving these two characters if they actually met in the We Bear Bells animation, since that the We Bear Bells and Summer Camp Island animations are somewhat similar. But since that this animation style is different from those, it really feels like that this is the only way for a crossover to happen involving Summer Camp Island characters meeting the We Baby Bells characters. You see, the main conflict involving the two is the spell book that they are using in order to find solutions to get back home. But unfortunately, they don't know how to work with it because the front of the cover is called Spells of Harm. But it's not really the Spells of Harm, it's being covered up after harm. You pretty much know what the final word of the book is if you're catching on. And due to them taking control of the spell book, it causes their friends to be transformed into different characters, mainly one of Susie's friends having the head of Panda, also having Panda having longer legs. I'm gonna be really honest with you, judging of how they really wanted this crossover to be humorous but also more fan service involving these characters. They really did what they could in order to make this crossover good, even though it's the last. Granted, I could be wrong, but at the same time, it may be the last crossover. To tell you the truth, the pacing of this episode is good. For 11 minutes involving these characters interacting, it's good, and to be perfectly real with you, it actually makes this episode a lot more interesting, knowing full well that instead of the main characters of Summer Camp Island appearing in this, it's mainly the other main characters like Susie and her friends. Believe me when I say this, I know full well that if they include the characters from Summer Camp Island, mainly Oscar and Hedgehog, I'm pretty sure it won't work out for a crossover. I mean, there was potential, but when it comes to an episode centering around Halloween or witches at most, it actually fits with Susie being the main character in all this, and judging of how that the animation on her is a lot more different in comparison to the animation of her designed from Summer Camp Island, they really wanted her to be a lot more expressive rather than just being the same expressive witch that she was in Summer Camp Island. I haven't watched Summer Camp Island in a while for obvious reasons, but I do remember the moods that Susie was always in that show. So seeing her doing so many facial expressions in this, it would have been the other way around if the baby characters were in the Summer Camp Island universe. And when they're gonna redesign the Wee Baby Bear characters in Wee Baby Bears instead of Wee Bear Bears, I'm pretty sure they would have been less expressive in comparison to Susie, who is way more expressive in this. And with the antagonist being the witch hunter, trying to take down the witches all around him, I can guarantee you that if this was an antagonist from Summer Camp Island, if there ever was an antagonist, I'm pretty sure that this wouldn't work out, considering that it would have been a huge plot hole involving how an antagonist from Summer Camp Island got summoned in the world of Halloween and a graveyard, because it just doesn't usually fit. And considering I don't take this show seriously in comparison to Camp Coral, this crossover was literally the best of what they can offer in comparison to the other crossovers that they did involving OKKO and the other crossovers from the other Cartoon Network shows, well, aside from Teen Titans Go, since it's mainly a Warner Brothers cartoon at most. I'm gonna be really honest with you that this crossover is good for what it is, and I can appreciate the fan service it's trying to provide, but like I said earlier, this feels like the final crossover that Cartoon Network would ever do, considering that during the time of this episode's release, Summer Camp Island and Wee Baby Bears were literally the only shows that were available, which is really saying something considering that last year Summer Camp Island didn't have any episodes aired, and since they're always airing episodes from Summer Camp Island, with new episodes in the second half of 2023, I really feel bad for Summer Camp Island, considering that it's getting a conclusion just like Craig of the Creek, but at the same time it's still being disrespected since it was mostly exclusive towards HBO Max. But since it's not getting the respect and treatment it should deserve, it's not safe. And it's literally the same way of what Infinity Train dealt with when it came to the third and fourth season. I'm gonna be really honest with you guys that this crossover, with it being the final one, is just giving me the indication that there could have been a lot more involving these characters. Like, I understand by this point, Summer Camp Island is 4 years old when it comes to last year's, and it officially turned 5 of this year, but thinking about this episode and thinking of how this crossover is going to center around the final characters that we're going to see from Cartoon Network is really, really depressing and really empty, but not in a way that makes the episode really, really sad. Sometimes crossovers aren't meant to be taken seriously. They're supposed to be fun, like the Timmy Jimmy Power Hours. Well, aside from the third one, if I'm ever going to get to that in the future. But my point is that this crossover is supposed to be for fun. It's a lot more better in comparison to the Codename Kids Next Door and the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy crossover, because that crossover was trying to take itself seriously, and it was really badly written. Seriously, no matter how long I made that review, when it comes to it being unedited, knowing full well that it could have been a lot more better. My opinions still stay the same, knowing full well that I just couldn't stand that crossover, and I can instantly sit through this knowing full well that it's mainly here for fun and not trying way too hard to be taken seriously. The teamwork involving Grizz and Susie is wholesome to say the least, and seeing the ending Susie's friends made an offer of the characters from We Baby Bears to come over to their island, mainly Summer Camp Island, I'm pretty sure that they were planning to do a sequel involving this episode. Believe me, I know for a while that they were planning to do it even if Summer Camp Island came to an end if the sequel premiered. But knowing full well that We Baby Bears is only getting 2 seasons, and judging of how slow it's taking for these shows to air new episodes, it's really an indication that we're probably not going to have a sequel involving Summer Camp Island and We Baby Bears. Which is a shame, because Grizz was offering to come to their world of Summer Camp Island since one of Susie's friends mentions that's where they're from, and they were probably going to do a good continuation of involving this by having Oscar and Hedgehog and the other characters interact with the baby characters, but since that's not going to happen, with no plans whatsoever involving the studio of Cartoon Network since they lost their building, it's really, really depressing. And believe me when I say this, when fanfiction isn't the answer to everything, you know that we always put focus on the studio who make these shows and what they can do. Granted, they're not perfect, I can understand it's mainly due to production order, or mainly of how the execution of the schedules are, mainly of how OKKO got treated, but still, it's really, really depressing that we're not going to have that, and we're only going to resort by doing fanfiction, which it's not always the answer to everything, because it's really becoming exhausting. I enjoyed this episode for being a crossover, but the reality involving this episode, if people don't mind, it's difficult to ignore it or forget about it entirely. But at the same time, for it being a Halloween episode involving the Bears, even if it doesn't center around Halloween completely, it's still a good episode involving witches and a crossover. I'm giving this episode an 8 out of 10.